I'm recording this reflection on the eve of the culmination of our Abbey 1000 celebrations to coincide with the feast of St Edmund, King and Martyr. There's something quite stirring and quite awe-inspiring to contemplate a legacy that stretches back to a time when Viking raids would have been within living memory and when the notion of England was very much still in the early stages of development. Who among us today would expect to be remembered in 1,000 years' time? Not me, that's for certain. We don't know very much about Edmund as a historical figure, and much of what we can say can be found by reading between the lines of the legends and stories that were created about him. We don't know what happened to his body after the Reformation, although I, for one, like to think that he is somewhere in the Abbey gardens waiting to be discovered. But we're not 100% certain that there is in fact a body to be discovered. The handful of buildings and structures that remain from the Abbey of St Edmund, including our own cathedral, give off only a flicker of the great light that was for centuries a major centre of power and pilgrimage. Yet despite all the unknowns, despite all that has changed, St Edmund and the abbey he gave inspiration to is a legacy that endures. The great irony is that the legacy of St Edmund has endured because it was never really about him in the first place. In his life and in his death, Edmund was pointing to another king who came 1,000 years before him, the person that the Church knows, that the world knows as Jesus Christ. It is by divine coincidence, perhaps, that the feast of St Edmund the King should coincide with the celebration that we call in the Church Christ the King. The celebration of Christ the King was instituted by Pope Pius XI in 1925, as European nations were still recovering from the aftermath of the First World War. The fighting had ended, but there was no true peace, as many of those post-war societies fragmented into extreme left and right-wing politics. The celebration of Christ the King was instituted to remind everyone that it is Christ who should reign in our hearts, and our lives need to express something of the faith, hope and love of the gospel above anything else. Our task, our calling, is not just to look back with some nostalgia and wonder at St Edmund, King and Martyr, but to join him in proclaiming Christ as the true King. We can do this each day, and we do it in those small, seemingly unremarkable acts of kindness and love. When we do this, we go on telling a living story of the good news of Christ, a story that will surely endure for thousands more years to come.